Well, hello and welcome to the World Mental Health Day webinar about the thinking environment. What I'm going to do now is share my screen. Yesterday I thought I'd shared my screen and just hadn't all the way through, so I'm just going to double check that. Hopefully I didn't do anything embarrassing at the other end. So it will just take a moment and hopefully you should be seeing my screen there. Yeah, can you just confirm that for me?
We can see your thinking environment slide.
That's wonderful. So what I plan to do is just probably, I haven't got my clock, but just probably talk through these slides for about 20 minutes, if you can bear that, and then come out of the slides. And I just really would love to hear what you think or want to ask or want to say. And what I've tried to do is get a balance between revisiting the principles of the thinking environment, mindful of possibly an audience of people watching this who haven't had the training already, but also as a refresher, but to share within that my thoughts and experiences of doing this work on breaking the rules and in other places recently. And I think I want to start off by saying that it's 20 years. In fact, my son was 20 last weekend. So it's more than 20 years since I started my thinking environment training. And I was pregnant at the time, hence the link. And in that 20 years, I have had the opportunity to study with Nancy Klein, to be part of an international collegiate of time to think practitioners. But I don't think I've learned anything like as much about the process in most of those 20 years as I have over the last few months. And that's 10 months of working on breaking the rules and working with organisations in a thinking environment. And my belief and faith in the process was always strong. In fact, I've turned Katina's thinking round about this, and you know that doesn't happen very often. But is now my faith in it is even more so. So just to introduce, I call the thinking environment a quiet revolution. What it is a process. And when I work with organisations, what happens is I bring the process and they bring the content. And what I teach them is the rigour and discipline of the process. And what they learn is self-discipline. And I'm going to be absolutely brutal here and say that in my work in adult education and in the third sector, mainly community sector, which is my background and where I do a lot of freelance work, there is a lack of efficiency and a lack of personal professional discipline. I don't know where that comes from, and it isn't everybody, of course, but I see it generally in teams. And what the thinking environment is doing is sharpening that up. You have to follow some really simple but rigorous rules, and you have to learn how to be succinct. The issue of succinctness is a big one, I think, for us. All that time wasted in meetings. So where people feel they haven't got enough time, that's a really fruitful area to work on. So what this simple but rigorous process does is it affirms and explicates values. It shares power. And it enhances diversity because it gives everyone not only a voice, but a responsibility to use their voice. And I think that's crucial. One of the things that we do in community learning is we're very keen on people having a voice, in offering the space to have a voice, but it's not always purposeful in terms of using the voice. This is a purposeful process, and it is genuinely culture changing. And where organisations or even teams are willing to buy into working in a thinking environment, what happens is that people learn these disciplines, including the discipline of listening to other people with respect, and that becomes part of the culture. Time is saved, decisions are made quicker, relationships are more open, transparent, and there's room for challenge. So I think of it as a way of being in the world. As I mentioned, my Fraser was, not born when I started my thinking environment training, and I have raised him in a thinking environment. And as I say, I think every time I introduce this, that if you were to meet him, and Yaya has met him, I think you would be able to tell that in the man that he's becoming. It's a place for virtual spaces, so we can facilitate Zoom meetings in a thinking environment. It's a space for relationships, for learning spaces. I teach in a thinking environment. It is one of the pedagogies I use at Northern College on the teacher education team. We use this and other pro-social pedagogies in order to build community. That's what we're interested in. Organisations and workplaces, and also political environments. I wish there was more of that, but two colleagues, Kay Sidebottom and Leslie Whiting, work with elected members in thinking environments. The resistance to that is often massive, but they're finding increasingly not as massive as you might think. We have a new generation of local politicians who also want things to be different across all political parties, and thinking environments is a way perhaps of moving forward with politics. So in terms of the impact on anyone's practice, no matter how they use the thinking environment, as long as they stick to the rules of it, what it does is establish dialogue around values so that ethical practice becomes intentional. One of the things I observe about our sector, again, if I'm to be absolutely blunt, is that we assume a shared values base, but we don't always enact it. And particularly in hierarchies, particularly in cultures of fear occasioned by, the scrutiny of Ofsted, or the perception of what Ofsted is, not necessarily the practice in my experience. Managerialism, all of these reasons, 0 hours contracts, all of these reasons why people get very frightened and values get lost, and we don't articulate values necessarily. It's power sharing. It's impossible to engage in without humility. It's also impossible to avoid responsibility. So at those two ends of the scale, the people who dominate and the people who withdraw their goodwill and input, it's impossible. You can sabotage this stuff. You could cross your arms and refuse to participate. You can storm out. You can interrupt, but you can't subvert it. So all of those hidden games, hidden agendas are exposed by the process of a thinking environment. So you've still got the difficulties, but at least you know what they are. There's something very honest about this way of working. It's diversity enhancing. Each individual is present as themselves, as far as they want to be. We all have a personal choice around that. But it means that those perspectives that often go unheard can be heard. You cannot be interrupted. So if you need to take time to think, to get to the thing that you never say, as a woman, I, as a black woman, I, or whatever it is that you are not saying at work, are not saying in the classroom, that is more possible to say. And I think there is a lot of work around at the moment, around introspection, some great stuff on TED, often from women, work around vulnerability and shame by Brene Brown, for example, which talks about leadership for introverts. And the thinking environment offers the opportunity for new leaders and diverse new leaders to find a voice within a collective. And as I've said before, it is culture changing. One of the dangers of a thinking environment is that people will try a thinking round or a council once, doesn't work very well, possibly because you've not been bossy enough about the rules, and then think it doesn't work. And again, this is, in a sector where we've got used to thinking in terms of toolkits and activities and fixes and, tricks almost. The thought of doing something long term, which short term is going to be difficult, but long term is going to have an impact. That's countercultural in adult education at the moment, and probably in education in general. Resistance, though, is futile. If you hold the space the people who resist are exposed. Impossible to subvert. Sabotage is really obvious. So I just wanted to enhance that point, because this is disruptive stuff. And what often happens, maybe if I do a whole day intervention with a team, for example, is that everybody falls out afterwards because it digs up the soil, if that makes sense. So this is not about being fluffy and touchy-feely, though it is about being appreciative and learning to build relationships of respect and understanding. But the digging up the soil leads genuinely to disruption. And obviously a lot of people have a lot invested in their own personal power and in maintaining the status quo. So in terms of affirmative leadership, I don't want to go too far down this line, but I'm working at the moment with a concept of power, a dual concept of power, potestas and potentia, the Latin words, or I think in French it's something like puissance and pouvoir. We just have one word for power in English. Potestas is hierarchy, it is politics as usual, it's the power invested in maintaining the status quo, it's getting yourself into a position of power and influence. Katina in her work has a potestas role. What she's trying to do through the projects that we've been working on with her is explore potentia, the power of possibilities, the anti-hero, and the affirmative leadership of breaking the rules. So I'm not going to, labour through this list, but you can see, I hope, how the way I've introduced the thinking environment makes it possible to exceed the limitations of obedience by allowing diversity. And that really is the bottom line. If you can create this safe environment for diversity, then what will happen is really creative. And when I talk about diversity, I'm not just, sending us off down a certain line. We tend to think of diversity in very narrow terms, I think, in our cultures, but also in terms of neurodiversity. Dismantling the white curriculum, where white just doesn't mean white-skinned curriculum. White means all of those of us who are othered for whatever reason, including our mental health status, our mental illness status, our mental well-being. So that potential is really drawn out through a thinking environment, but it can take place in the potestas organisations, senior management teams, team meetings, formal hierarchies, where there is a commitment to change. Where there isn't a commitment to change, it will be resisted, but of course you can see that. I have been on a journey with my own mental health and well-being in the 10 months of the Breaking the Rules project, which is our affirmative mental health leadership project. And some of that is coincidental. Some of that is also because being in this place of exploring mental health and well-being has helped me reflect on my own situation. And of course, I have been consistently and repeatedly and on a daily basis working in thinking environments in all sorts of different constellations. Where thinking environments work so well for people who have mental health fragility, shall we say, is because they offer a predictable process, or a set of predictable processes which are boundaried and safe. And that is safe for facilitator and safe for participant. Teaching people how to do the thinking environment is very thorough, detailed, hard work really. But being part of a thinking environment is really easeful. It's impossible to bleed thinking environments into therapy if the rules are followed. And that's a really clear thing for us on the community mental health research pilots, because we're in the business of community learning, not in the business of therapy. There's an absolute relief of being present as yourself if you want to be. And that part of that, I think, is the stress of trying to be heard is lifted. In thinking rounds, you're going to get a turn. It's up to you whether you use it or not, but it's not like sitting in a staff meeting, trying to speak. Thinking environments bring ease, they bring silence, which can be uncomfortable, but once the culture is established, that brings such an ease. And you know what, it's no surprise that the thinking environment of Nancy Klein is rooted in her Quaker upbringing. So that place for silence and ease in everyday life is absolutely enshrined there. But above all, there's an absolute joy of not only being listened to with generative attention so you can do your best thinking, but knowing you're going to be listened to. That is just an incredible thing, knowing that you are not going to be interrupted. It makes going back into the hurly-burly of normal conversation really difficult, I think. And certainly I, for one, am questioning a lot around me. Places I go now where people are not listened to, it just gets really, really obvious. So I want to just pause there and say that I know that through the Breaking the Rules project, this is proving to be a transformational process for many people who have taken thinking environments into their own organisations. I want to be very clear that you're either in a thinking environment or you're not. And it's not desirable to be in a thinking environment all the time. That wouldn't be, you know, that would cut out an awful lot of the energy of human interaction. It's a different energy in a thinking environment. So making a conscious decision about whether you're in it or out of it is a really important part of the judgment and skill of the process. However, when you're in it, the rules have to be followed. Otherwise, it isn't a thinking environment. And that's because all a thinking environment is a situation where these 10 components are held in place. If they are all present, you have a pure thinking environment. Sometimes one or two of them are not. So we have sometimes been training. I was doing a thinking environment day recently in a cafe stroke social centre at the centre of a bowling green. Kids were running in and out. People were frying chips. Our eyes were streaming from chip fat. Place was not in place. And so we managed, you know, some pretty good thinking, but probably not as good as if place had been, you know, held in place there. Pedagogically, I always begin every course, every learning group by looking at the 10 components of a thinking environment, doing some thinking environment rounds work, and then asking people how they want to work together. What are their values? What are the values they want to see expressed in the learning group? That creates a group agreement, which is really meaningful. I've tried to communicate this in something I'm going to send you, Val, as well. So once those components are in place, we then have a series of applications. And interestingly, Nancy Klein called these applications before we had like apps on the phone, but the metaphor is really useful. Thinking pairs and thinking rounds are the building block applications. Start off with those. We have a Padlet available to anyone who wants to see it that lays out how to do a thinking pair, how to do a thinking round. These are the applications that build the culture of people listening generatively to one another and thinking for themselves. And then once the group or the individual has mastered those, you can go into all these things here. And again, I've got training notes, reflections available on every one of these applications. I'm not going to talk through them because it's nearly time to be over to you, but I do want to mention the Time to Think Council. In the last few months of working, the council stands out as a way of cutting through the fluff. It's laser sharp, where people are working, where people are committed to being succinct. Time to Think councils are able to provide incredibly useful perspectives on complex issues. There is a discipline around being succinct. And I think probably with one or two of you, we've been involved in Time to Think councils or thinking rounds where people have just not heard or not wanted to hear that directive. So to do a really sharp council, people need to have an experience of the rounds, be getting used to that succinctness, but they are amazing and they really shift stuff. So through things like councils, the transforming meetings process, which again, I can talk anybody through the details of that, but they, you know, our team, my Teach Northern team at Northern College, wow, the creativity and camaraderie and critical friendship of our team has really been brought about by working in a transforming meeting process. The diversity process as another group application, but then all of these individual applications as well. You can interview people in a thinking environment, you can do appraisals, tutorials, you can of course coach people. So there's the one-to-one and there's the one and many applications, a whole world of stuff out there to be explored, and we have loads of resources available via the MHFE website and a Padlet on there to help you work through it all. So just to close, what it's all about, this belief that Nancy Klein had nearly 50 years ago now, through her observations, that the quality of everything we do depends on the quality of the thinking we do first. Her life's work has been observing how the brain appears to make breakthroughs when it's stuck on something, through unpicking and overturning untrue limiting assumptions. And interestingly, in the past 20 years, 15, 20 years, the work of neuroscience has started to show us that this in fact is the case, that this is how the brain works, that her observations were accurate. So it's not another tool in a toolkit. It's not just another model. It is a process and really a way of being that can bring about profound change. And at the end here, just to keep it up, if anybody wants to take a screenshot, if anybody's watching this back, links to all sorts of different resources, and I'm sure Yaya will be able to publish these slides along with the recording when she comes to do that. So I don't know how that was for time, Yaya. Did I go way over the 20 minutes?
That was spot on. That's 22 minutes. Thank you so much.
So, well, thank you. And thank you for great attention. Tracy, I can see that you're here now, which is brilliant. I'd not noticed you come in. Val and Jessica, Val, you were blinded by the light at one point, weren't you? But yes, I could see you giving great attention, and that helped me to do really wonderful thinking. So what I'd like to do now, if it's okay, is I've set us up in the Celebrity Squares view. I'd really love to do a freshest thinking round, just to demonstrate how we can use a thinking environment in an online space. We're not all sat around in a circle in a room, so what I would like to suggest is that the order of the circle goes, I'm going to ask the question, what's your freshest thinking? And Jessica, if you go next. Tracy, if you are able to, I know that you were on the chat the other day, so I'm not sure if you can speak to us, but either chat or say your response to freshest thinking after Jessica. Val, if you follow on from Tracy, Tracy has to put in the chat. That's cool, Tracy. Val follows Tracy. Yaya, if you would follow Val and then back round to me. Nobody will interrupt you, and that means being patient while Tracy is writing into the chat. We will give our attention to the words that you type in, Tracy, and give our attention to one another. And we still have, you know, really 20 minutes or so of this webinar. So please feel free to speak for as long as you want. So, Jessica, what's your freshest thinking?
I'm worried about being succinct, but I'm going to give it a go. Morning, everyone. It's Jessica from Southend. Whilst Lou was speaking, I was really thinking about the battle of communication at work. And I was thinking about how, because another team member's done breaking the rules, so how we could use that within our very, very small. It almost feels like a rump. I feel like a rump within the college at the moment, that we can use the thinking environment to strengthen the team. But I'm also thinking how we can move that out to benefit the college and the learners and colleagues. And I don't have any answers around that, but I can see it's so needed at the moment, because the quality of communication has changed, let's put it like that. And I feel probably, you know, I could look the other way, pretend that's not happening. But thinking environment gives you somewhere to stand, really, about how things could be done. So I just need to sit with that, I think. I know that I can find ways to bring that process into my own team, as I said, but I feel like we're quite isolated. So it's about whether I concentrate on that, because that's easier to do, or whether I do that and then think about how it can sort of go out beyond our own little space, if you like. So I have questions for myself, really, and that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I normally wouldn't step in after each person, but just to suggest, if everyone wants to open up the chat box, which is on the bottom horizontal space, and Tracy, if you want to give us your freshest thinking, we understand, you know, fingers on keys, so don't worry too much about you know, formatting. Just get your thoughts down, and we will watch. I'm thinking perhaps, not meaning to interrupt your thinking, Tracy, but I realised that I don't know whether you're still typing or not. Oh, that's excellent. So whenever you finish, take as long as you want, but then say, I've finished, so I'll know we can move on. Thank you. Keep going. Thank you so much, Tracy. Val, what's your freshest thinking?
Quite a lot, actually. I did the online Breaking the Rules and got really interested in thinking environment. Did a lot of reading, all the lovely things that were on the Padlet wall. Recognised myself as a serial interrupter, which I think is probably a comment that I put into the forum. And made considerable effort to stop myself doing that actually in meetings. So it did have an impact. I was better when I was running meetings, but when I started thinking about it, I realised how lacking in patience I was with people who you might say were not on my wavelength or didn't share my values. And instead of actually listening to what they were saying, I know I was just butting in and putting my view in. As a result of what you've been saying, I've kind of widened that thinking now and thinking about myself as a teacher, which unfortunately I don't teach anymore, and actually realising I was actually much better at using that type of environment when I was teaching. My background is actually not community learning, but teaching young people, so NEETs, if you like, or people at risk of exclusion. And it was just so important to give them safe spaces to express themselves and know that they would be listened to, because a lot of them have a background of simply not being listened to. So then I'm kind of comparing myself the teacher and myself the manager, which is quite interesting. And it's almost like having a split personality, that in one sense I was recognising the value of providing those safe spaces, good spaces where people could express themselves and be listened to. And then another environment where I'm losing patience with colleagues and not giving them space and time. So I think it's a whole interesting thing to think about. And then thinking about how I've now, I haven't finished my working life because obviously I'm still involved in the project, but I have taken retirement from FE, not because I've tired of working in FE, because I think you have to be, it's almost a lifestyle choice, I think, working in FE now. But because, having said that I was a serial interrupter, I then started feeling actually I'm not being listened to. And you mentioned, which I wrote down, actually, the culture of fear. And I think that dominates quite a lot. And part of me wants to think it's male dominated, but actually it isn't. It's just as likely to be women as male dominated in that way. But it's that feeling that you're not valued and nobody really wants to listen to what you've got to say. So now I think I must talk about having multiple personality now, that in different environments we're reacting differently. Sorry, that wasn't very succinct, was it? But that's it. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Val. Thank you. Yeah. What's your freshest thinking?
My freshest thinking is how acutely aware I am of what's going in my head and how I'm behaving in any situations when I'm talking to other people that are not like very, very comfortable friends, but also with them, with the family, with friends, when the communication is at a particular level, when they have something to get off their chest, so to speak, I kind of remember, I'm going to listen. I'm looking forward to perhaps finding out if thinking environment can help do away with the phrase, you know what I mean, because I've started going quiet and saying, yes, I do, or nodding my head, or saying, no, I don't, which I had in the past found aggressive if it came to me when people say, no, I don't. And I'm thinking, oh, please say you do. So I've set that as a little bit of a challenge to me to see, to do and see what happens with, you know what I mean. So that's my freshest thinking.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you. I wondered if anybody had any questions, be as geeky or techie about the process as you like. I love that sort of thing. And I'm keeping an eye on the chat in case you have questions, Tracy. Just dive in.
I don't think so.
Lou, I had it's not really a technical question, it's kind of a question about bravery and courage. How did you, because obviously now I'm thinking, people pay you perhaps to come in and do that, but in the beginning, how did you how did you bring that up? And I'm particularly thinking about Val's culture of fear, actually, which is kind of what I was touching on, and I thought, yes, Val, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. How very few people can shift the culture quickly in one way. And I'm thinking, actually, the thinking environment would be a real opportunity to just shift it back a bit. How did you kind of? Because I like to think, I do go there, but actually, I'm not at the moment, and I'm still sitting with it. So, how did you start in places where you kind of had challenges, you know, where you weren't being the expert, where you were just saying, look, this is an idea, what do you, you know, let's give it a go, what do you think?
It's a great question. Part of the reason that I do, I work now, I have a part-time contract, not very part-time, but enough to allow me to do freelance work with organisations, is I haven't managed to make my own organisation a thinking environment. And I think part of that is I was very, very inexperienced when I first tried to introduce it, and a resistance built up, which is not going to ever be overcome. So the point at which I realised I wasn't going to be able to do that, I looked around for where I could have an influence. And that's when we started to do, really intentionally start to do this work as a team. And we were just a tiny team, and now we're a team of 7, where some people are on sessional contracts, but everybody rocks up on a Wednesday morning and we have a thinking environment for half a day a week. If the only thing that stops us being there is teaching, if people, you know, don't want to make the trek because they live miles away, we Zoom, but we work as a thinking environment as a team. And so I think it was about really making a very self-full decision, because of course you can imagine my upset and frustration at hitting my head against a brick wall for a long time. I recognised where the blocks were and where they weren't. And what happens now is that people drop in on our team meeting when they want to be part of a thinking environment. And even though their work is not the same as our work, there's still a place for them there. So that's what's fired me, really. I guess the opportunity to go into other organisations. And what I do is I then go in and I offer it them. I work really hard on the sort of first day, and then just hope I've left enough there for enough people to want to take it forward. But as with any culture change programme, you never get buy-in from anybody straight away. And, you know, I'm not going to give advice, but I think you could do a lot worse than just work within your own team, at your own space, and not worry about the rest. And if somebody wants to pick it up, they'll pick it up.
Thank you.
How do you respond? A typical question I can imagine that you might be asked in that situation is, from the group, is how are we ever going to reach a decision? Do you ever come across that as a problem?
Yeah, I think sometimes, because I think there's an assumption that what we're looking for is consensus, and I'm very clear that we're not. In the transforming meetings process, and you'll see, I'll make sure that you can see the stuff around that, Val, in more detail. One of the things we do is all our agenda items are questions, and then afterwards in brackets we'll say what we want, because sometimes we pretend in team meetings that we want a decision, but the decision's already made, or 2 people are going to make it over a fag outside or whatever. So if we want a decision, it becomes very intentional, a bit like, do you remember the film 12 Angry Men, and being in a jury, where you start off by saying, if we made a decision now, what would it be? Round, 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 round. Okay, and then open it up for discussion and keep checking in. What's your freshest thinking? And I actually find that complex decisions can be made really quickly. And some of the things we think we do need a decision on, actually the decision is, everybody agrees anyway, it doesn't need any discussion. So it's much more honest and open about decision making. And if you are trying to sell that to somebody, on the Padlet there's a great the executive summary of a great piece of research by Emily Havers, in which she went into businesses and looked at how the thinking environment had saved time by speeding up the decision making process. But it's a hard sell, because the mindset is consensus somehow.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think you feel, when you're running a meeting, sometimes you have a long agenda, or you've been given a really long agenda, and the pressure, you feel this pressure, got to get through it as soon as possible and get decisions on it, you know, get that written down. What are the actions, what are the decisions, instead of actually doing what you suggest, which actually is thinking about it and taking in ideas and being more creative about the decision making. It's quite a hard sell though, isn't it? I think I admire you for adopting it in the whole of your life, actually, and taking this to other organisations. It'd be so much easier to sit back and just let them get on with it, really, wouldn't it?
I think so, and there's been plenty of times when I've wanted to do that, when I've been tired, you know, when I've been like a single parent with a little kid, and it's no coincidence that as Fraser's gone off to uni and I'm here on my own, that I'm finding the energy and capacity to be able to go and do that. I was doing some work with a team of people at the weekend, and what we did was fix it, because, you know, I bring the process, they bring the content. So what we did was generate complex questions and then do a sort of omnivote process where we ranked those, and then we took the top question as an agenda item. And one of the lower down questions was, you know how we just talk about the same thing over and over again, often in meetings? I sort of knew that one of the lower down questions would be answered by the main issue, which was we did as a Time to Think Council. So I phrased it as, do we still need to discuss the issue of brackets decision? And when we got to that on the agenda, it was a quick round, no, dealt with in 10 seconds. Whereas on a standard agenda, we'd go back round all that wheel again.
Yeah, no, good, thank you. And there's something in chat, Lou.
Oh, great. Sorry, Tracy, I spotted it then. So, yes. So Tracy said, so do you suggest first approaching and introducing this thinking to those we work with that are like-minded and open to different ways of working? I would say absolutely so. I'm really into, I'm not a big hierarchy person, because equality drives me so much. I used to work in the NHS as a clinician, and, you know, the very fact that people are treated differently according to the colour of their frock, it seemed ridiculous 25 years ago, and it sort of still does. So I'm really into finding different constellations of people to work with across grade, across department on a project. So if you can find a few people with a similar interest, or maybe a few people working around mental health, Tracy, and start, whenever you guys get together, start running it as a thinking environment, then you learn to develop that culture, and everybody, once they've experienced it, they'll just love it, as long as you hold those rules in place. And then, of course, in your teaching, as I know you've been doing, that's a really great place to learn your craft, because I suppose you've got the safety net there, haven't you, of being the teacher. And so if somebody interrupts the round, you're not just speaking with your own voice, you're speaking with teacher voice. And I know that's sort of against the equality, but it means that you can practice your craft and get used to holding those rules in place where you feel safe in that role as teacher. And then you stretch your courage a little bit into you and your colleagues. And then maybe one day you might decide to stretch your courage a little bit more into the bigger staff meeting or whatever. I hope that helps. You're welcome. So I think we're probably done for time, but I do like to close properly, as you know, if you've been on training with me. So the final question in any sort of thinking environment meeting is, what is live in you? L-I-V-E. Funny sort of question. It works because it allows people to transition out of the session by leaving it as shallow or as deep as they want. So we'll go the other way around. So I'm going to ask Yaya first, what is live in you? Then Val, then Tracy, then Jessica. But actually I'm going to start so that my voice isn't last, which is a bit of a power play, isn't it? And I'm going to say that what's live in me is how much I enjoy Zooming in a thinking environment, and that I appreciate learning something today, which is how to Zoom in a thinking environment when one person's on chat. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. Yaya, what's live in you?
I think what is live in me is the awareness that little steps will lead to something bigger and more comfortable, and will eventually become part of how I am and hopefully how people around me are. And I have this acute sense of consciousness of how new to Zoom I was about 15 months ago. and how scary it was and how comfortable it has been today to be with a small group of colleagues who are all comfortable with Zoom, and how well it works, and how easy it makes things. And I think that awareness that those small steps have led me to where I am, and this sense of confidence, but also openness that I don't know everything, that I'm open to learning, I can apply those to thinking environment. There was a little bit of a barrier in me that I'm conscious of, which is, oh, I can't remember those 10 principles. I wouldn't be able to introduce all of those things. But actually, the more I'm hearing about it, the more I'm aware that I don't need to know everything about thinking environment in order to start practicing little bits of it. And I think I'm really pleased that with the bits that I've done, and I'm acutely aware that I'll continue doing it. I look forward to it. And thank you.
Okay, me. What's live in me is, it sounds a bit odd, but it's kind of like a joy to have taken 30 minutes out of my day. And this is someone who's semi-retired, to talk to colleagues in this way. And I kind of share what Yaya said is the wonders of Zoom, really, because I'm also relatively new to Zoom. Didn't feel very comfortable. I'm still not totally comfortable with talking to a screen when you're so used to talking to people face to face. But certainly that's my current thinking.
Sorry, yes, I'm used to Zoom. Just need to unmute. I think what's live in me is can you hear me? I've got a lot of questions really about how the battle to be heard, or you know, what I can do about that with the thinking environment, because I think even if I go to places where I can't make that a thing at the moment, there are still principles that I can use to not feel that I'm, you know, kind of on. I would never say I was on the attack, but the opposite of that is the defensive. So I think there's some middle space I can hold even when I'm not in a thinking environment, and I can make that more solid by using the thinking environment within my own team and within that safe space that we already have. Thank you.
Brilliant, Jessica, thank you. And Tracy? I loved how you indicated you were finished there with thank you, Tracy. That's wonderful. Thank you to everybody. And call on me if you want to have a conversation, a Zoom, send me questions, ask me questions. If you would like to try having a thinking environment session, sort of the full coaching thing, we can do that on the phone or Zoom. I want this to get out into the world, and if I can help you take it out into the world, then I would just be really, really delighted to do so. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Yaya, for organising. It is a joy. You're right, Tracy.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.